Greetings from Columbia Business School Executive Education. My name is Lindsay Machula, and I'm here today with Trish Gorman and Malia Mason to present on the topic of Beyond Administrivia, proactively shaping your portfolio for meaningful career growth. Before I introduce both speakers today, I'd like to go over a few quick logistics. A recording will be available after the webinar. Please follow us on LinkedIn at Columbia Business School Executive Education. And don't forget to use the Q&A box to submit your questions. It's my pleasure to introduce Trish Gorman and Malia Mason. Both are faculty co-directors of our Women in Leadership program. Trish is a strategy expert and consultant who's developed and delivered high-impact learning programs for hundreds of organizations in diverse industries. She also has an upcoming book coming out, so stay tuned for that. Malia Mason is the Courtney C. Brown Professor of Business here at Columbia Business School, and she also teaches in 2 electives in the MBA program, Negotiations and Leading Teams. I want to thank you both for joining today. I'm going to go off camera, and I'll join you in the last 10 minutes of Q&A.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. One theme that we weave through the Women in Leadership program at Columbia Executive Education is the need for women to take a more proactive and strategic approach to your careers. We want to get you beyond administrivia, the things that sap your time and keep you from making those vital investments in your career. How do you actually leverage your full leadership potential? Well, what we're going to talk about today is how you might set more meaningful personal goals and align those with your core values. And goals really are important. We see far too many women who are doing a really great job in the position they're in, but they're not really clear yet if they're on the track towards CFO or COO. Maybe they really want to be a founder, but some of the activities that they're engaged in are more suited for moving towards a CEO position. And those are different trajectories. We also emphasize how you may need to make conscious compromises. These are basically just trade-offs, where you're doing it not because you're forced to do one thing that you may not care for over another, but you're consciously accepting that you might be taking on more risk or moving into a role that is not your first choice, because these compromises help you to attain your overall goals. The last thing that we'd like to emphasize today, because we only do have a short time with you, is the idea of thinking about your work as a portfolio. So when you're making decisions about what to do, most of us think of ourselves as having a role. The role could be that you're an investor, for example, using the idea of portfolio that we're more familiar with as a financial portfolio. But it's one thing to say you're an investor, and it's something different to say that you're someone who has invested in, let's say, a portfolio of real estate, emerging market equities, and bonds. Rather than think you have a role as a project manager or a role as a COO, what is the portfolio of activities that makes up your value contribution to the organization? I'm going to give you a couple examples. Let's get started thinking about how this might manifest in real life. Let's look at Jana. Jana is someone you might recognize. She's a very hard worker who takes on challenging assignments. She prepares very conscientiously for her performance reviews and often takes a lot of effort actually going back through everything that she has contributed, all the effort she's made, and everything that she's achieved. She's 100% dedicated to her role as a senior project manager. And she's currently on her 3rd large-scale change project in a multinational firm. Now, this might seem like you or someone you know, and we might applaud Jana for doing all the things that we've actually been socialized to do. Hard work, conscientious preparation, 100% dedication. What could go wrong? Well, let's look at someone else. The next person we'll look at, we call Ellen. And Ellen is another person you might recognize. She has an excellent reputation. She is the go-to person, not only in her firm, but across her industry for supply chain and technology challenges. She devotes significant time to attending conferences, listening to webinars, increasing her expertise, increasing her knowledge base. And in some cases, she feels she is making compromises to do these things because they take time away from her hobbies and her family and other things she could be doing instead. But she really enjoys being known as a subject matter expert and is willing to devote this time. Now, currently, if you ask her, she feels she's on track for a COO position in the next few years. She's in a medium-sized robotics firm that's actually growing very quickly, and she sees that there are great opportunities for her in this firm. Now, again, you may recognize yourself here, and you may see that Jana and Ellen have great career prospects. Well, we'd like to step back. And when I say we, myself and my colleague, Malia Mason, are both going to help you kind of refocus and maybe shift your mindset a little bit. Because we first asked, do Jana and Ellen have clear goals? Well, we don't really know from what we've told you. But if someone is looking at you in your workplace and they don't know if you have clear goals, it's the same as if you don't have them. People should be able to know not just what you're good at and not just how you've performed in the past, but what you want and where you want to go. Okay? Think about different people in your workplace, and you don't have to gender this. It could be men or women. Do they have clear goals? Do you know where they want to go and what they want to achieve? And then the next question is, are they making conscious compromises? Now, in the case of Ellen, I mentioned, she perceives she's making a compromise sometimes to go to a conference when she might rather go to something that's more leisure or family oriented. But when we say conscious compromises, we mean things that are really targeted on reaching your goals. For example, many of us mentor others. We were someone people come to when they have questions or when they have maybe a more experienced view. Mentoring others can be very rewarding, and in some cases, it is a criteria for advancement. But you might make a conscious compromise to say, I'm going to spend less time mentoring others and more time working on my own career advancement. Now, for some of us, that doesn't suit our personal values, but for others, it could be a very strategic career move. So if you know a Jana or an Ellen, or that sort of looks like you in the mirror, think about if you're making conscious compromises. I've seen people who put off buying a home. They rented in the place they were working because they wanted to be ready for global opportunities. And to have that readiness for global opportunities, they wanted to actually demonstrate, even though it was a compromise, it was a real trade-off between some of their personal goals and some of their professional goals. It helped them signal to the organization that they were not just asking for a global opportunity, but they were really ready for it, and they were crafting a lot of their big investments of their time and financial investments to support this goal. And then the third question is their portfolio of experiences risky? Is Jana taking a risk in investing as she is in her performance reviews and in the large scale change projects? Or is it just valuable? Her multinational company will always have these projects and she'll always have job security. Well, if job security is her number one goal, then that might be low risk. Is Ellen taking a risk in being a subject matter expert in supply chain in the robotics industry? It'd be hard to argue that it would be highly risky overall, but for her personally, if she really wants to be the COO of a firm, is she taking undue risk or is she really creating value? So let's take another look, both at Jana and then at Ellen. Okay. On the left here, you see everything we've already described about Jana, the hard worker, the conscientious, dedicated senior project manager. But first, let's look at whether being a hard worker really serves her. Would you rather be a hard worker who takes on challenging assignments, or would we rather do something different? Would we like to shift from being that hard worker to being a goal-focused professional, so that when people talk about or work with Jana, they can see she's really focused on, and we don't know at this point, but let's say she actually wants to move to a C-level role. She'd really like to be the chief operating officer of her firm. But whatever her goal is, because we don't want to say everyone wants to be a C-suite member. Maybe she'd really like to get into new project development. Maybe she'd really like to be a founder. But whatever it is, The most important thing is she's strategic and proactive about making choices that bring her closer to that goal. So next, she's preparing conscientiously for performance reviews. Well, performance reviews are backwards looking. We need to encourage her to spend at least as much time focusing on the future. And instead of being 100% dedicated to her role, next, she should really take 10 or 15% of that time that she's dedicating to her role currently and invest that in future capabilities and skills. And many of us even are saying we're giving 110% to our current job. Instead, back off. You're doing well enough and reinvest that time elsewhere. Lastly, instead of repeating the same project over and over, she needs to really make sure there are differences in the work she's doing and emphasizing those differences to show that she's building versatility, she's expanding her future options. You don't just want to do well where you are, you want to grow into what you could be. Let's turn to Ellen for a minute. And similarly, there's nothing really wrong with what Ellen's doing, but to advance her career trajectory more quickly and more confidently, it might be that instead of thinking just about her excellent reputation, she thinks about the goals that her subject matter expertise could or does serve. She's already made clear she wants to be the COO, or she thinks she could be. Is her expertise leading to the COO role, or are there some aspects that she needs to work on that she's neglecting? It could be all these conferences and webinars are perceived as enriching her instead of thinking about the benefits of that information and that intelligence for her whole organization. So next, she might want to think about who benefits from her investments in knowledge acquisition. Is it just her, or is it the organization? And can she make that more visible? It's not enough to be valuable. You need to be valuable and visible. She enjoys being known as a subject matter expert, and perhaps she isn't suited to be a COO, but she needs to really analyze what she enjoys about this reputation in this role, and whether it is something she wants to consciously trade off and give up some of that subject matter expertise to become perhaps a more powerful player in the organization. And it really doesn't matter if she feels she's on track for the COO position. It matters whether her organization sees her as a viable, legitimate candidate. So she also needs to invest in determining what are those organizational requirements. Subject matter expertise in supply chain and technology may be a necessary condition, but it may not be sufficient. And she might be missing out on key pieces of maybe team management, motivating others, navigating uncertainty, things that are vital to actually attain that role she aspires to. So just to recap, when you want to get beyond Administrivia, you want to back off from the lower value things you're doing and leverage your full potential. If it isn't worth doing, it isn't worth doing well. And make those conscious compromises. Be clear on what you're willing to give up to achieve your goals. Think about your portfolio, not just your role. Being seen as a valuable resource is great. Many of us love being seen as a valuable resource, that go-to person, that expert. But that is seldom the route to leadership. There's more to it. And I'd love to turn over the rest of our time to my colleague, Malia Mason, who's going to talk a little bit more about the types of work you may be doing and the way you may actually take some of the advice I'm giving and make it real. Thanks, Malia.
Oh, thanks so much, Trish. That was great. So Trish talked about the importance of having clarity around your career aspirations and the need to make conscious compromises. We also touched a little bit on this idea that there's some value in framing your role as a portfolio of activities. I want to do a slightly deeper dive on this notion of portfolio of activities and suggest that you can maybe categorize your portfolio into two types. You have activities that we might call high return activities. These are activities that directly influence your performance evaluation and help you get promoted. Or they might be activities that indirectly influence your evaluation or career because they provide opportunities for you to learn or develop new skills, to raise your visibility, to expand your network, or offer new ways of thinking about things. Okay, so that's high return activities. And what we can contrast that with are what I'll call low return activities or administrivia. These are activities that, you know, a monkey could do. They're of some benefit to the organization or your business unit, but they really aren't going to push the needle where your career trajectory is concerned. concerned. Each of us has a portfolio of these activities. It's going to be a blend of this stuff. But one of the things we talk about in the Women in Leadership program, or WIL, is that the average male tends to have fewer low return activities in their portfolio as compared to the average female. And so why is that true? There's a number of reasons. One has to do with women being asked more to take on low return activities or administrivia. There's a lot of research that speaks to this. They're approached more frequently with this type of work. A second has to do with how comfortable the average male versus female is declining requests to do this type of work. What I'm showing you here are data that come from my executive MBA program. So I asked, and from some WIL participants, I asked these groups to think about the last time they were approached by someone who was asking them to take on administrivia or low return work. How comfortable and free did they feel to decline the request? And what I'm showing you here is that, on average, males report feeling greater comfort saying, I'm sorry, I can't take this on, as compared to females. Again, can't emphasize enough, these are going to be overlapping distributions. There's some women who are perfectly happy to decline, and some men who feel very nervous about it. We're talking about the average here. So that's the second reason. I think the third reason has to do with the fact that women on average are more likely to volunteer when someone asks in a group setting, hey, can someone take on this administrivia? Can somebody be in charge of bringing cupcakes for, Jan's birthday, right? So women are more likely to raise their hand and volunteer. In the Women in Leadership program, we kind of dive a little bit deeper as to the root cause of these things. So these are explanations as to why women tend to have more low return work in their portfolio as compared to men. But I think it's worth thinking about why women feel less comfortable declining as compared to men, or why women, are approached more with administrivia or low return work. We don't have time to get into that today. What I'd like to do is offer advice to, both genders with respect to how to actively manage your portfolio to ensure that you're going to have to do some low return work, but that you have enough high return work, opportunities to grow new skills, to get visibility, to grow. And so let me just offer you some suggestions as to how do you put up boundaries or negotiate the contours of your role. So number one, I don't think this applies to everyone, and my sense is it probably applies to some of the males and females out there, but some of us probably need to volunteer less. If you are in the habit of always raising your hand, consider the possibility that you don't have to do that and you have the power within you to not raise your hand. I know it can feel uncomfortable sometimes, but replace this with some other activity. Maybe it's taking notes, maybe it's taking a sip of your coffee. I think it can be helpful to focus on the opportunity cost the task carries. By that, I mean, if you take this task on, the time and the energy has to come from someplace. What's it going to come at the expense of? Okay, so that's one piece of advice I have for the group of you. Second, if someone approaches you with low return work, it's not your responsibility to find someone to do the work, but many people feel more comfortable declining a request if they can offer a solution. Recognize that a solution being another person, recognize that the person who is requesting help with administrivia needs to find a home for that task and get back to the mountain of work that they have. Propose a specific underutilized person. Is there someone else in the organization who really isn't ever doing this stuff? Maybe suggest that they take it on. You might be prepared for but I don't know if that person would be very good at this task. If it's administrivia, it really doesn't matter. And I think the answer is, I think this is a chance for that person to grow in this way, right? Okay, I have just a few more bits of advice for the group of you. We've talked a little bit about, putting boundaries to make sure that you're not mired in administrivia or low return work. I think as Trish was sort of highlighting in the first part of this presentation, it's also important to proactively seek high return projects and to go on record. This is what I'm trying to accomplish, right? If you're not clear, if you don't make your goals visible to people, for all intents and purposes, you don't have goals as far as they're concerned. So signal to people like, this is what I'm trying to accomplish in my career, and therefore these are the types of projects or activities that would be helpful to me. My sense is that most managers want to help their people grow. And that's their job and they want to feel efficacious, but it's not always clear to them how to go about that. Help them out by saying, this is where I'm trying to go with my career. I love to be involved in projects that, provide these kinds of opportunities. One benefit of doing this is if you get on more high return activities, especially ones that are visible, I think people are going to be far less likely to approach you with requests to do low return work. Just two last slides. One thing to say is that you are going to have to say yes to some of the requests that you do low return work. Everybody needs to help the organization, and you're all responsible for it. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be helpful, but if you're going to say yes, I'd be careful about how you approach that yes. You don't want to have an unbridled inner Girl Scout who just says, happy to do it, no problem, right? I think it's the reason being that people draw inferences from the way you say yes. If you say no problem, people give you less credit for doing the work. They will come back to you with low return work. They might infer that you like doing it. And so I think it's managing their perceptions of your yes involves saying to them, I think I can do this. Let me sleep on it. Can I get back to you? I just need to think about, whether I have room to take something else on. Last thing to say is, so far I've come up with some examples of, people coming to you and requesting that you take on low return work. And I think that happens with some frequency, right? And it's important to have some boundaries. But I think the other thing that happens is that some of us are what I'll call ball catchers. And that is, organizations often have like unmet needs, and you're one of those people who can't help but like catch the ball or the unmet need when it's about to drop. I think that inclination is admirable. I think, there are some real benefits to being that way, but if you're constantly catching balls, especially if those balls are technically other people's responsibility or low return activities, I think it's going to be harder to not be spread thin, to really nail the high return stuff, and to advance in your career. And with that, I think it's time for us to take some questions.
Thank you, Trish and Malia. We had a lot of great questions coming in through the webinar. So we want to get started and kick off the Q&A to get to as many of those as possible. So first question that we had come in from Jennifer says, how do I balance developing my own development with my team's development?
Thank you for that question, Jennifer. And it's wonderful you're thinking about your team. So many leaders are really leaders because their team achieves, and it shows their effectiveness through their team. I would say one of the key things that's very consistent with what Malia and I have been talking about today is delegation. So of course, first of all, you want to be really clear on what your team's goals are. What does success look like for your team? And what does success look like for you? Of course, there should be a pretty large intersection of those two sets of activities. But for you, delegating some things that are not high potential for you, high value for you, to your team could be incredibly effective, because then team members are getting a chance to grow and show that they can achieve mastery in these types of activities. And then for both you and your team, try to eliminate or automate a lot of the low value work that might be associated with the Administrivia that goes with running a large team. Thank you.
That's great advice. Next question from Ada says, how can I strategically prioritize my workload to focus on high impact activities while still meeting the demands of my role?
Yeah, so it was Ada. Is that who posed the question?
Yes,
Yeah.
Ada.
Great. Chris, do you mind if I take this one?
Go right ahead.
I mean, great question, Ada, and I think it really speaks to the heart of what we're discussing today. I think it really comes back to this idea that Trish talked about, that it's really important for you to have some clarity around what you're trying to do with your career. I think that's the starting point for all of this, because, you know, what is a low versus high return activity really is going to depend on your industry. It's going to depend on your role, and it's going to depend on what you're trying to do with your career. Once you have some clarity on that, I think it gets a lot easier to be like, hey, listen, is the return on my investment in this task there or not? And, you know, use this frame of high versus low return work in deciding.
Wonderful. Okay, next question. We have Juan. He says, how can you prepare yourself to be ready for a manager role?
Malia, I'll take this one, or I'll start and you can chime in. There's a lot here, and I'll give you just a couple of things that are really consistent with our theme for today, which is to prepare yourself by really understanding what the qualifications are for that manager role, and then examining whether you're willing to make the trade-offs, because very unlikely that what's required for the manager role will already completely align with what you're already doing. But are you willing to make the trade-offs to maybe dial down some of the things you're doing and invest in some other areas that will make you a more attractive candidate for that role and make you more ready to master the activities and the skills, the mindsets, and the behaviors that are essential for that role?
Great. Okay, next question we have from Amir. He says, what qualifications would help get somebody promoted? Just sort of piggybacking on that a little bit.
I mean, I have a quick answer. I mean, I think it really is going to depend on, you know, your organization, right? That having, I think it's really important, if you don't know what's going to get you promoted, that you ask someone, right? And it might be that your organization has a set of like leadership principles that you can look at. If you don't know, I think you ask someone, plain and simple.
And to add to that, you can also look at who's already moving up in your organization, who has the leadership roles. You're going to first notice how different everyone is, because of course we're looking for complementarity on leadership teams, but then try to understand what the similarities are. And those tend to be the key qualifications that are non-negotiable. Then beyond that, you want to have your own brand and your own approach to leadership that makes you a great complement to those who are already in those roles.
Having your own brand is very important. We have a couple more minutes, but I still want to squeeze in a couple of questions. We have over 300 people on today's webinar, so a lot of questions coming in. Katarina says, how do I gauge in which projects it's worth participating in? It's a big one.
Chris, want to take it?
Sure. At least I'll start. And again, so much of this depends on your industry and your organization. But the projects that are really worthwhile are of two major kinds. One is it's going to give you something new and different and stretch you, give you a way to move out of your comfort zone, because really where your growth begins is beyond where you are now. The second is to not move you out of your comfort zone, to establish your mastery, and it's something you know you're going to be great at. But typically it allows you to then, as one of our other participants mentioned, help to develop your team more. So either it's something that stretches you or it's something that stretches your team. Those are the two best kinds of projects to get involved in and to take on. Now, of course, you also want to be thinking about what is the most valuable to your organization. But just take that beat, take that pause, as Malia says, when any project is offered to you or when you're thinking about your next staffing, and treat it as a negotiation. Sometimes it's not the project that matters, it's the terms on which you've accepted the project.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think in thinking about this question, you know, my brain goes back to how I was defining high return work. And, you know, some of the things I mentioned there might be a useful guide. So certainly like stuff that is part of your formal role that will get you, you're told you're going to be kind of reviewed based on doing this thing, might guide your thinking. But I think also projects that offer some visibility, right? Projects that give you an opportunity to interact with someone from the organization that you don't know, that allows you to grow your network in a strategic way. Maybe, you know, most of us probably have a narrow sense of like how the organization works, right? You see the foot of the elephant. Maybe this is a project that will let you understand a different part of the business. I think those are some things that might guide your decision here, just to add to the great response that Trish had.
Great. I think we have time for about two more questions. So just squeezing these in. David says, I'm really interested to, hear examples or methods to make conscious compromises to make progress towards goals. Can you share your thoughts here on this topic?
Yes, and conscious compromises is just, again, another way to think about trade-offs. You may be offered an assignment that's going to create more opportunity for travel. And for some of us, that's a positive, and for others of us, that's a negative. And most of us, there's a mixed response to that. So to make these conscious compromises, what we want to do is think through what you're willing to give up in order to get to your goal. And also be really realistic about what the assignment or what the project requires from you. So it's easy to say, well, they are telling me it's 50% travel, but it probably is only going to be 20%, as opposed to being realistic about it. Or again, as Malia says, negotiating to make sure that you have maybe some things that come off your plate when you take on a new assignment. But a lot of the compromises that we see when we're doing the Women in Leadership program are, as I said, people who move away from mentoring others to focusing more on their own career, take away from giving that 110% to your current role to backing off and doing 90% on that, or even 80% on that role, and then investing more time in relationship building and future focus goal setting. It could be taking more risk. It's, for many people, that's a conscious compromise, accepting the feelings of frustration and the potential downside of taking on more risky assignments instead of the sure thing that you've mastered.
That's great. So last question. This was a theme that was coming up a lot in the chat, so I wanted to touch on this as a closing thought. People said, how do you balance saying no or yes to low value work without coming across as being not supportive or not a team player or kind of being pegged as a difficult person?
Go, Malia.
Want to go? I mean, you go. You want it?
Well, no, I think really the high value, low value work you've done really informs this question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, just because you're asked does not mean you owe it to someone to do something. So I just want to remind people of that. Like, I think it's worth thinking about if you're one of those people who struggles to say no. I think it's worth reflecting on, like, why. Is it that you always want to please people? Is it that you don't want to disappoint people? So having some understanding of like the root cause of your reluctance to say no, I think can be very beneficial, because there are a variety of reasons, and what I would suggest maybe depends on the reason why you hesitate to say no. I think that in a way, maybe this gets back to the conscious trade-offs point that Trish is making, right? Like, maybe saying no makes you seem like less of a team player, but it might be worth it if it opens up an opportunity for you to really invest in something that a monkey can't do. Okay. Right? That, Trish, yes.
Well, and it also could be a way to kind of surface the gender discussion, because today we haven't really emphasized as heavily as we might that sometimes a woman may say no to a low value work assignment and be perceived as not supportive. Whereas if a man were asked the same, to take on the same work, they would not be perceived in the same way. So if you can see a way to kind of elevate the conversation, and even to sometimes ask that, well, last time, Doug or Steve or somebody didn't do this, and I don't think anybody judged him any the worse for it. I'm not saying you want to be too provocative, but I don't think it's out of bounds to start to think about not just the reasons that Malia mentioned that have to do with you as an individual, but at an organizational level, or maybe it's not gender, maybe it's just the person who does this work is always from your department, and maybe your department always takes this on and it becomes a departmental discussion. But trying to think about it through these different lenses. Is it about you? Is it about the task, the department, gender, something else, and not necessarily personalize it so much.
Yeah.
A lot of us men and women personalize a lot of things in the workplace that are really more organizational or institutional.
Trisha's response kind of sparked an idea in my brain, which is just, you know, I think you can always, like, if it's in the context of a group setting, you might say, hey, listen, you know, I can't do it this time, but if someone can do it this time, I'll do it next time, right? So in effect, like reminding people, we should rotate this task. I think the other thing to say is, like, organizations are not good at keeping track of low return work. And you might have to remind people, you know, you have to do this diplomatically, but it might be like, folks, I just can't take this one on because I did X, Y, and Z, or I'm busy doing these 5 things, right? Or it's maybe like, I can do it this time, but I'm really spread thin between all these 6 other low return activities and this high return activity that I'm doing. You know, don't assume that people are remember what's on your plate. Even your manager, they don't remember what's on your plate, or that it's like top of mind for them. And so finding subtle ways to kind of remind them can be helpful too.
That's great. Well, thank you both for your time today, for answering all of these great questions. We unfortunately aren't able to get to all of the questions, but we did our best in the time that we had. We look forward to seeing Trish and Malia in their upcoming program, Women in Leadership, taking place this March 25 to 27 in New York City on our new Manhattanville campus, which you can see behind me. Be on the lookout for more information about this program in your email. We did have a couple of questions about the recording that will be sent along with slides. And thank you all for joining us today. Columbia Business School Executive Education wishes everyone a very happy, safe, and healthy holiday season. Have a great day.